I took
You guys
it
will
off.
be?
I
I was like, that's,
Yeah.
wow.
Current virus.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to our work session for our first city council meeting of the year. We will get started. We got a long agenda tonight, bigger than this, so I want to try to get through this quickly. So we will start right away. Review of this evening's agenda. Any questions, any comments about the agenda, any changes that need to be made to the agenda tonight? Anything? Okay. We'll move ahead as planned then. Item 1.2, any future agenda items that council or staff would like to see?
So I do, Mayor, it's funny, Mayor. I have talked about this in the past, I've spoke with Michael a little bit about it and a few of you about it, but the agricultural issues in our communities, I've been reached out by several people about our ag zones. We have ag zones that are interesting in that if we want to truly have agricultural in our community, then our agricultural uses should comply with our agricultural zones. So if we're going to call it an ag zone, then we should have our ordinances comply with what should be appropriate in an ag zone. And they're very conflicting right now. We've talked about to developers about our A25, and it's like it's confusing to them, the language and things like that. We talked about it doesn't coincide with what really, it seems like it's a quarter an acre lot. It's not necessarily, right? So I want to look through and review that. I have a lady that's very interested in doing an extra greenhouse on her property, but she technically couldn't because of the outbuildings and the space it takes up in her backyard. But if she truly is designing her backyard as to be provident, to provide for food for their family, and it's in an agricultural zone, should we prohibit her from doing that? So, and currently it is prohibited. So I just think we really need to flesh that out and understand in Harriman, are we ag friendly and we want to preserve some of that? Or are we saying, no, we're gonna continue move down the urban path and we're gonna have to start weeding out our agricultural? So, I know where I stand on that, but it's a collective effort that we need to look at and really, really clean that up. So I would like to see that move forward. I think the first process would simply be to pull up the ordinances that comply with all that, maybe throw it out to all of us and let us start looking through that and start making some suggestions on what looks right, what doesn't. It's a huge task, and I know you guys are busy, and so I guess you guys are busy, so I'd be glad to help work through a lot of that.
We have actually formed an internal committee, Clint's been leading this, where we've been looking at the 8.25 zone. Primarily that bonus density structure. Again, like you were talking about, it's misleading, it's confusing. But we can certainly broaden the conversation and look more at animal rights and look at how it compares with some of the R1 zones as well. So, and we'd be happy to do that in a work meeting, a joint meeting.
Right,
We can certainly provide the information ahead of time in a memo.
that would be
Yeah,
great, just so we
so-
can start fleshing through that.
Yeah.
I know, I talked to Chief about this because one of the residents was concerned about her animal rights. She's like, yeah, but I have these two large animals, this one really should be a medium, but now it's classified as a large because of the way your language reads. Those kind of things, we need to make sure we have something in there that maybe builds an exception where you can come and get a permit if you have, this many and it exceeds that, and it all goes back to the, what is it, chapter 10? What's the?
Title 10.
Title 10?
10 and 5 kind of
Yeah,
sometimes
so
interact.
those kind of things we need to take a look at. We need kind of, we're gonna be bringing back the animal control issues and things like that. I just wanna see that get done sooner than later.
I think a key issue that we would like to receive direction on from the council is, would you like us to engage the planning commission as early as possible, or would you like to wait until the council has weighed in on this issue and then engage the planning commission?
My feeling is wait, and I always
Okay.
say that just because I don't wanna send them all something and then it's completely different than what we were thinking and then they have to rework it again. I think it's easier to send them kind of what our vision is or what we're thinking and then they can see how it complies, and if, do you guys, how do you feel?
I agree. I think, we could add on to that meeting, renaming our zones too.
I agree.
No, for sure.
Would it be ideal though to have maybe the chair or vice chair of the planning committee be part of that group discussion?
And or
So we have
can
their
do
voice
this joint meeting.
joint with some of the department?
Our first joint meeting is until March, but we could certainly get you
Yeah.
the summary of all the information ahead of time, and then we could be prepared for that joint meeting in March.
To me, that makes sense,
Yeah,
March is
yeah.
good.
Okay.
I've mentioned that once or twice.
To hit on another thing that you're mentioning, so tonight we're talking about accessory structures. And so that could be something else that we add into this amendment as well.
Yeah, I had a couple questions on that as we move through that too, same kind of agricultural kind of questions, yeah. Okay, that was my biggest one I wanted on the agenda.
No, agendas are too long anyway.
Right. I've got a few things, but I think I might get through some of these issues before we. Okay, thank you, Sherry. Move on to item 2.1 then, administrative reports, 2023-2024 revenue estimates. Justin Sorensen. Welcome, Justin, I know you're new here, city, welcome.
Yeah, I am fairly new. Been with the city about a year and a half. So, see some new faces out there. If you haven't met me, I'm Justin Sorensen, Finance Manager. I'm working with Alan. He's asked me to take you through these revenue projections tonight. I know it's a busy agenda. We can get through them relatively quickly, but if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to stop me and we can talk it through. We like to start with revenues as we get into our budget cycle. It helps give context as we get deeper into talking about expenditures, personnel, capital projects, those types of things. Revenue kind of gets us started and gives us an idea of where we stand. Now, revenues are in the future, so it's a little bit more art than science. So typically, our philosophy with these is to be a little bit conservative on our projections. We'll start with property taxes. You can see up here that the city receives property taxes in 6 different funds. 3 of these, the general fund, the safety enforcement area, and the fire service area, comprise the whole city, while the CDA areas are a smaller geographic footprint. Now, relative to what the residents pay, what we receive at Harriman City is a smaller amount. But we still consider it a major revenue source because it's very stable and it funds some of the core elements of government. So we have increases here. They do line up typically with growth rates. Property taxes either go up through growth or an increase in the tax rate, which we aren't anticipating. So what you see here is just strictly increase due to growth. Any questions on these?
Does this, the way we have it listed out here where the fire service area is different than general fund, I know that that is intended, but that's not how it currently is for this budget cycle. So, right now, those are all combined into one line item on our property taxes in one fund right now, correct?
Yeah.
They are paid to us in one number. We are dividing them when they come in, so they are in the separate funds.
In a separate fund, okay, just, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, that fund has been set up. It's just more of a manual transaction right now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Does this intake any growth for the Olivia Hills or future projections?
It's really tricky there depending on when that comes in. So in 2023, we're projecting about a 7% increase, and then in 2024, it's dropped down to a 5%. If that development speeds up, it is something we could look at revising that projection. But for now, these were the numbers we felt most comfortable with. On to sales tax. This is the biggest revenue source for the city. So we spend considerable time monitoring it as we get our monthly distributions. How it's done in the state is 1% of sales tax is local. 50% of that comes from stays at the point of sale. 50% goes into a statewide population pool and is distributed later. On the chart here, the blue bars are from the population pool, the orange bars are our local point of sale. The number at the top is different from what is in the packet, and that's because originally the packet had showed just the value of the blue. This is combining them both. So you can see the increases there. With sales tax, unlike property tax, there is some fluctuation based on how the economy is doing. Right now, local and state economy is doing relatively well relative to the national and global economy. We are projecting a 20% increase for fiscal year '23 and a 10% for fiscal year '24. We feel like the local factors are strong enough to outweigh the things that concern us a little bit globally and nationally as it relates to supply. Right now, demand is very high, growth, population-wise, is very high in the state of Utah. I'm sure we've all run into some issues, maybe trying to buy something because of supply chain worries, but we still feel very confident that these numbers are gonna be very strong for us in the next couple of years.
Can I interrupt really fast?
Yeah.
Senator McKay today made a great point, and I think that we should follow up with that and that he said that maybe we should do some sort of a little marketing campaign to say, let's see how we can raise that orange by encouraging people to, if you find it anywhere else in the valley,
Buy it online.
go home and buy it online because we get the sales tax revenue from that. So I think that would be a really good marketing thing. I would love to see us follow up on that. We can even do the
$100 or something.
clean air thing, stay home, order, anything like that, we can promote that. I think that would be really good to see if we can get that even further.
Which Smiths you shop at.
Yeah, exactly. All those kind of things is really, but he said, he goes somewhere and takes a picture of what he wants and goes home and orders it from his home, and that way
Right.
that's generated.
Yeah, so that orange bar, it is getting significantly bigger. Part of that is due to online, and then part of that is due to the economic development team here doing a really good job bringing in businesses and the population growth, more people buying stuff here, so that's a great point. Franchise tax, these are taxes paid on utilities. Typically, they're found on a customer's bill. So for energy, Rocky Mountain Power, Dominion, cable is cable bill. For these, they trend pretty typical to growth rates in the community, except for telephone. We left that one flat just because there is some inconsistency there in the distribution of it as people, almost exclusively have moved away from landlines to cell phones, so that's a challenge, but otherwise these are growing about the same rate as some of the other taxes that are influenced by growth. Next is building permits. This is another very significant source of revenue. The numbers we have here show a little bit smaller growth than maybe we've seen in the prior years, but it's still significant. And it's consistent with what we've seen over the previous couple years. So we have a 5% growth in 2023, 5% in 2024. This is kind of contingent on how development continues to go, but we think the demand there is strong and we feel pretty confident in these numbers. You can see here, it's down a little bit from prior highs, but the trend line is still positive and we expect that to continue moving forward. Engineering and inspection fees. These are a little bit different than building permits. These focus more on subdivisions, infrastructure, things of that nature. We have projected increases of anywhere from 2 to 3% in these, just because they are a little bit more scattershot than building permits. They kind of come in chunks, a little bit more difficult to project. DNC road funds, these come from state road monies. They're distributed based on population and road miles. So these also track pretty consistently with our growth rates. We have a 7% increase there in 2023 and 5% in 2024. So these will continue to trend along with our population and as we add road miles in the city. Park fee, this is a fee that's assessed per residence here in Harriman City. Once again, we have a 7% increase in this as we expect it to trend along with our growth. extremely stable, easy to project. A lot of confidence in that number. And then lastly, we have our impact fees, which is an important number. We have 7 funds up there that are collecting impact fees. So these are allowed by the state for us to collect money so that new growth can help pay for the infrastructure required to support that new growth. These can be a little bit more tricky to project just because they do get paid as development happens. We have increases in these funds from anywhere from 2% up to about 5%. So we expect these to continue to be strong for us as long as growth is happening and things are continuing that way. We should see small but stable increases in these funds. And that's the end of it really, unless there are any other questions. Overall, I would just describe our projections as cautiously optimistic. Things look relatively good for Herman City in the future, and we see no reason why that should change. So, no,
Any questions?
any further questions?
Justin?
Okay,
Joe, appreciate it.
thanks
Justin.
everyone.
Thank you. Okay, move on to item 2.2, discussion of potential appointments for a regular planning commission member and an alternate member.
So I'm looking for direction from the council as to, one, whether or not you're interested in appointing one of our alternate members to fill Mayor Palmer's position on the planning commission as a regular member. All 3 of our alternate members have expressed a willingness to serve at the pleasure of the city council. And of course, if we do appoint an alternate member as a regular commission member, what is your, what would you like to do as far as the process of advertising, interviewing, and selecting an alternate member? Council can certainly participate in an interview process if you'd like, or we're just looking for direction from the council on both of those potential appointments.
Mr. Mayor, if I might, I would recommend that we appoint Heather Garcia as a regular member. She has received great reviews, she attends regularly, she's actively involved, she's the most senior of the alternates. I just think she would be great. And then whatever we did last time in reaching out and advertising and letting people know we're looking for another member, let's go through that process again and
And I completely agree with that.
Sounds good to me.
Mr. Mayor, I'd agree with that. Do we have an SOP for that process, so we don't have to keep on doing that every time we have this?
We had one, but with our previous mayor, we made some adjustments.
Okay.
And I didn't know if kind of a new mayor, if we wanted to change that process. And in the past, I understand the mayor had been part of the interview process.
Gotcha.
But we didn't do that over the last.
I wouldn't mind being part of it as we bring on a new alternate. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think that's critical, the training is, that alternate level, having that time of training as an alternate is huge, so I think.
We can have this appointment scheduled for the next regular city council meeting, and we'll begin the process of advertising, letting residents know that they can apply for the alternate position.
Perfect.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks, Michael.
Do we need to make a motion or anything on that?
it's just a board meeting.
You'll get your formal.
Next time, yeah.
Okay, on 2.3, ARPA funding priority update, Tammy.
Yes, so last August, during the August 25th city council meeting, we had discussed a list of projects that meet the qualifications for the $4.8 million that Harriman had been awarded for ARPA funds. In those discussions, one of the projects, the $35,000 for an economic development consultant, that was just approved to go ahead and get that started, so we have spent $35,000 on that. But the remaining dollars, we had the 3 projects that were listed in your packet, which is the Old Town Waterline, the Innovation District Sewer Line, and then the Autumnall Storm Drain. And at that time, council had decided that the state had just announced a grant match program. And we submitted those projects to be considered for that grant match program to see if we could extend the amount of dollars that we could, use, and then maybe potentially do more than one project, because a couple of these projects would take the majority of those funds. There were 445 applicants for the $50 million that the state was awarding, and I believe that equaled, $1 billion? And so, unfortunately, Harriman was not selected. So we are now bringing these projects back to see if you wanted to prioritize these projects for that $4.8 million, or if you had any other additional projects that you wanted us to consider. But one thing to take into consideration is that finance has to have our project submitted to the Department of the Treasury by the end of this month. So we have to have all of the detail. Before, we just gave them a concept of what we were hoping that those funds would go towards, but now they actually need the detail of those said projects. The projects that were listed, I don't know if you want to talk in depth about those a little bit more. I do know that Blake, Jonathan, and Justin, they're all prepared to give you any additional information on those projects, should you want to talk further about them. I will say, so the sewer project, it's a $2 million project, and it is also in the sewer district's budget to get that project done. I don't know if their budget is for next year. So there is an option for us that if we work on putting together an agreement with them, we could perform the work and then potentially be reimbursed for that afterwards, because it is a project that they know that they will need to have performed.
What would be the benefit of doing that?
Well,
Especially
you would get,
when you say potential,
well, so if we were doing that, then those funds would then come back into our general fund.
Unrestricted.
Versus our,
Unrestricted. So,
So we could use it for infrastructure, like, we could use it for
Another
road.
project.
We could use it for road,
Right,
but we can't do it now with current.
Is that the total 2 million, or is it partial?
That was an estimate.
yeah, and
But would they reimburse us for the sewer district's already anticipating $2 million budget for their project?
So I'm not sure what their budget is, but I'm imagining it's more than two. After we met with them late last week, the line was longer than I thought it was going to be. So it could extend into the 4 million range, but
But our section is that smaller.
so we could get estimates. What we'd do is we'd start design right away. Well, the sewer district would start design, and we could pay the bill on that with the ARPA funds. And then once we got that, we'd know the estimate on it, and then that would go to the sewer district board to execute a reimbursement agreement to the city for whatever the project cost was.
so I'd say as long as the reimbursement agreement is solid, yeah, that's a good idea. Do it, get the money, and let's do the other ones, you know? I would say that, whatever you're not spending on that, probably the Old Town Waterline replacements really need to be done. And I'm not sure where we're gonna get money to do that another way, so.
And that's possibly a multi-year project.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that if you can do that with the sewer line and get reimbursed on that, then you could do the sewer line and the Old Town water lines all with the same amount of money. I like that plan a lot better.
or we wait a year and the sewer cup does it anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, then you're not trading money, you just do it.
Cause they are planning on doing it within the
Saying
year.
that's all reimbursable.
Yeah,
It's just when does it get done?
the only thing would be is that,
You'd have to tag that reimbursed money coming into that project.
yeah, and the other thing is that, yeah, it does make it unrestricted, but if we're all gonna do this other thing anyway, what's the point, right?
Yeah, cause it's not like we don't have enough things
Projects.
projects that fit the
That
ARPA
qualify,
thing
yeah.
to qualify for.
The one other, sorry.
I was saying, if you wanted to spend it on a road though, then you would do that, and then they give you that money back, and then you could use it for a road. Typically with a utility like a water, our rates should have capital replacement built in. And so typically utilities, you would just cover that. It's probably not a one-time project, but in a capital plan, you put it in over 3 to 5 years, you would replace those lines strategically. with your rates, cause that's what your ratepayers are paying for their it's not just their water, but it's also to maintain and refresh infrastructure over time.
Yeah, but these could be 70-year-old lines and we have how old is our water district? I mean, we haven't been collecting replacement costs long enough to do
Yeah, you should still.
those
be
kind of
okay.
lines.
Alan and I haven't talked about it, but
Well, it's what the current plan is, right?
Just because I love to make meetings go longer. I also keep having that tickle in the back of my head that we had this conversation 100 times about the stormwater basins, all those detention basins that are sitting there undone that we've collected money from, and we could hammer out a bunch of those with this money too.
Yeah, those need to
But
be
not with
taken-
ARPA money though, right?
Yeah,
With
Yeah,
ARPA money.
it
ARPA money
qualifies.
can be used for.
Those need to be taken care of, and there's still the 105,000 special assessment from UFA.
So I just think, I know that there's big projects and things like that, but then I wonder if we knock out 15 of these problem projects that never seem to get money funded for them and be done with them. And then we use the money, the
Reimbursed.
rates to pay for the water line, and we let the sewer district come in and do the sewer line. I don't know, those are just some thoughts, cause it's just not seeing them getting done.
Well, what was the total amount on those missing pieces?
I don't remember, do you
It was
remember,
like, the
Jonathan?
total was 100 something, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a hand.
So I think
Not
that
a
makes
huge
sense to
amount,
knock
it's
those
just a
out.
few hundred.
Could you do
Like
the sewer
No, it was more than 100. I think one was almost 90.
Like 900,000?
Yeah, the summation is gonna be,
$1 million?
So
$100,000.
almost $1 million.
It's a lot, right?
9.
But they're little segments, I can get those really quick, just give me a few minutes, I can get those.
You may
What
be
do-
able
what
to
do
do
you-
both, and another thing to consider is, we were approached by Bullfrog, and they're interested in expanding their south lot, and the only way to expand is for the sewer.
Is with that sewer
because they
line
can't
too.
sewer out the only thing they have to. So, there's that aspect of it.
So I think now you want where you can do that, get reimbursed, hopefully, right? And then use it for all
So
those
those other
others.
projects.
But I think you can do both, or all those projects, you're talking $1 million, you're talking
Yeah,
budget 2
4.8.
million, but you got 4.8, so,
You're thinking the sewer
So
could be
the
4 though?
2.8
I mean, it could probably be closer to 3 plus now.
You know,
So,
can I-
remember Justin?
We haven't seen
Talking
any
about
of
is
the
making
cost
it
estimates
stretch.
from
To Sherry's
Just
point,
put
List.
one
when we
thing
were
in
looking at,
instead
we were
of
looking at our
thinking
capital
about
projects plan,
reimbursement.
there were a whole bunch of like 180, 220, 97, I remember a whole bunch of those, and we were saying, no, we have to use the money for these big projects right now, cause they're just urgent and, or we have a commitment to do them. But we could knock out a lot of projects with $1.5 million, right? I mean, that's, to your point, the lingering troublesome things that never get done. This is an opportunity to cross a whole bunch of those off of the capital projects list, and maybe,
Because that will always be the case.
Right.
There's always
Right.
bigger things that come up that take those dollars, just
Nibble those
6,000
down, yeah.
less than everything else, right?
right, and the smaller projects, because they're less urgent or, or less impactful, right? They're not as high on the list of priorities, so they continually get pushed down in favor of other things. And, our money usually ends out at number 2, and those projects are like number 27, so this might be a good opportunity to do those. I don't have them all, handy, but I think if we brought that same list we've been using back up,
If,
we could go, let's just boom, 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 get enough of those to add up to the 1.8 or whatever's gonna be left.
Yeah, the
We're saying
remainders.
we're gonna do 6 projects, and we'll end up doing
With the dollars,
why not?
I think we just, if 3 of our projects equal that amount, then that's what we have to do. We just have to put in what we're spending it on, and then that's what it has to be spent on. So-
projects, which you submit at the end of the month, and then if
And then you
It
just show
comes
that
in
you
on
ran
sewer,
out of
you can
money
do that
doing those
too.
projects at a certain point in time, so.
So we give them
Sure.
$5 million worth of projects, and then anticipate we can get through most of them.
So my
Or
hearing,
6 or 7 or 8.
Yeah.
That they just be, we would just continue to work through those projects until the money ran out.
So if I can, UFA,
yes,
that 105,000, that is directly COVID related that we're gonna pay one way or another.
Yeah, so knock it off, it's
just get it paid.
Okay, so
Cause this is money that's
100,000.
We may
allocated for
have
that kind of stuff.
more when we start collecting from the tax, but that, those funds then need to go to rebuilding
Right.
106 and the other stations.
Let's use funds for COVID issues to pay off COVID issues, I like that.
That's another thing I think, I know that we could do it and then get the money back and it wouldn't be tied to ARPA, but it's ARPA funds, so let's just use
Now
it
it's
for
irrelevant.
ARPA
Projects.
related projects.
105, but
There's a,
I like the storm retention ones, cause that, I mean, they'll just keep getting bumped down and never get done.
Yeah.
1.4 million total on the ponds, when you add them all up.
So I'm hearing,
When was that budgeted as well? Cause it's probably more, probably closer to
It was
two.
a couple weeks ago, so.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so we might be
it was never
closer.
budgeted.
Yeah.
It was
Wow, sorry,
It was
estimated,
estimated,
yeah.
yeah.
Which is what we were just talking about, we're gonna put them in
By the
and
time you
then do
push
as
print,
much
it's
as we
gone up,
can,
right?
and then if we run out of funds because of inflated costs, we run out of
So
funds.
you are
Just
saying the
wait, we'll see
stormwater
what-
ponds first, then what would be the
and
next
do a sewer
item?
district,
That's gonna,
is that what I'm hearing, an innovation sewer district line?
And
Yeah.
or maybe get us a quick list of some of those little slivers that we can knock
So
off.
I would say that, I'd say you do all the detention pond ones, the sewer district line, and then put all the rest of the UFA and all the rest of the other projects on there. And then, you know, if we run out, we get the reimbursement, then we can hit all the rest of the next ones on the list.
UFA, stormwater, sewer line, Old Town. And then,
Old Town's gonna be on the surface rate
Yeah.
though, yeah, so it's gonna be
well,
at
cause yeah,
the
Old
last,
Town's gonna
yeah.
be kind of,
So that's what I think what he's saying is that
it's gonna take.
we don't need to use the money for that, cause there's another way to pay for it. We don't need to use the money for the sewer line, other than we can expedite it
For
in
the
interest of
advantage
bullfrog, get the money back and still use that for some other projects.
That
but,
makes sense.
Reimbursement.
is there an agreement in place to get that reimbursement?
It's in talks.
It's-
Yeah,
yeah, we've
right,
discussed
that's
We'll
a
have to
little
have
bit of a
the-
gamble too.
That's it.
So yeah, I would like to know that first, because I don't wanna put it in and then we're just forever on
But
the hook
if
for
we're just doing a
guarantees.
list, saying, yeah, all those things are approved, here's the money, you decide what you use them on afterwards, then great, we can go through that, right? But if they're saying we wanna know
Well, we'd
for
have to
sure
have-
right now today.
Well, could we just attach our $50 million capital projects list and then just,
The ones that are.
we'll see how far we can go.
$48 million of it done.
There's been discussion with staff, and that's how we knew it was
Yeah.
budgeted. It's planned in their budget for next year, they're collecting impact fees for that sewer line for next year's budget. So, it's budgeted, so it would follow that it's most likely they would execute a reimbursement. But it needs to go to the board. Their board will meet in a couple weeks, and it's not on the agenda yet, so I don't know if we'll know that before the
Prior
next
to the-
month. But we could know it within.
As long as we're not having to make a firm commitment, here's the things we're definitely gonna use it for, but just saying, here's our list.
No, we already
We have-
gave them the
yeah,
list.
we have to
They
make-
now
Now-
have to
now
have
we
the
have to-
details by the
That's
end
a
of the
little
month.
tougher, cause
So,
unless it's button.
We'd have to over project by $2 million to get our projects done, and maybe not do the sewer district.
Now, the state is considering opening up another grant match program, but we don't know when that's going to be, but
Or
that,
if we
we
would
can also.
get any of it
right.
again, yeah.
So we can also apply for projects during that as well, if we have additional little projects that maybe qualify that are on our list. So that's something to consider as well, but yes, like this last time, there's no guarantees, and from what we heard in the meeting today, they'll open it up to everybody
Right,
to
the process,
resubmit
yeah.
projects instead of just
Or they
allotting
get
it to the
rescored
projects
again
that have
and-
already been in, which is unfortunate, but
Too bad we don't know what our scores were. We can bump them up.
So,
well, I honestly thought that the Old Town Waterline project would have been selected, like, I thought that was the one that checked the most boxes, and it just
Jen,
wasn't.
do you have that capital projects priorities list that we worked on so great? We had picked a few of those in the last budget cycle. Do you have what's left that you could share with us?
All the projects that were not selected?
Yes.
That would be eligible, cause
Yeah.
that's the trick, it
Yeah,
can't be
cause that's the
street,
the trick,
it has
is
to
it's gotta
be
be eligible.
water, stormwater, sewer, or broadband, those are the ones that are automatically.
2 million reimbursement,
Okay.
and you can use it on whatever.
$40 or $50 million one for broadband, that would be
That's about what it's gonna be.
But that's the thing is I remember a lot of projects.
Yeah.
I just don't remember what they all were.
for sure. And a lot of them were transportation related, so they would
Yeah.
qualify.
But, you know, I remember a toilet was number 50 on the list, right? And we were like, wait a second.
Well, not a toilet.
We moved that up, so.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of things I keep thinking, if they're eligible, we could knock out a ton of those kind of things.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Do you want the amount, or you want to just start listing through the projects, or?
Can we throw it up there?
Yeah.
Awesome.
If you can get it to.
I'm gonna email it to,
Yeah, I think you'll have to plug in.
you want me to plug in, or would you want me to just email it to you?
Put an email.
There it goes.
That way it can be shared on everyone.
Yeah, they had made some changes to the qualifications, making it a little bit easier for a lot of these projects to qualify, but it's still projects within those same realms, and ours
Main things.
already
Got
met the qualifications, and so even though the changes were helpful to some, we had already met the qualifications, and so it didn't really have a huge impact for us. And they did loosen some of the requirements for broadband, but again, our broadband project is so large, 4.8 million wouldn't make a huge dent in that, so. But we will still consider to try and get
Yeah,
some
actually,
funding for broadband.
pretty close, just under maybe. Materials, our insertions have gone up, so. Let's say this one.
The nice thing about the storm drain detention things is that we've changed our internal policy so that we're not gonna have these lax in budgeting anymore, so that when the developer's gonna be responsible, so if we can clean up what's out there, then going forward, we have a good policy in place that they're not gonna continue to be a problem. We gotta get what's there and cleaned up and done.
They've been sitting there
So long, yeah, it would just be nice, even for the aesthetics in our city, just to get them done.
Yeah, landscape those
You're
things.
making me very happy.
Question,
Put some bike trail.
how,
Yeah.
I'm serious.
with the new stormwater construction over in the Mountain Ridge,
The restaurant's
Right.
helpful.
and the fact that those upstream
We were just talking about
Ponds.
this today.
are no longer needing for retention, is there a plan to
We were just
tune those
talking
up?
about it.
Number like 2 on my whiteboard to-do list down there.
See, I like where your head's
Jonathan put in the
at.
capital projects list to add a plan for those ponds for this next biennial budget.
Yeah.
For the
They've been
final
really good.
outfall,
I've
but
got some
address all
residents
those
that
ponds
are
down
still
there.
like, what is the deal with these, and
Yeah.
making just following through on that promise that was made to the residents, I think would be really important, so.
Each one's gonna be an individual review, like is there plumbing in place, is it proper, and then we'll have to just come up with a design on how to get it to flow and then what to do for landscape.
can you read these?
Kind of,
So,
Magnifying.
now these are all, this is the
This is
entire
prior.
master list?
yeah, not all of these are eligible, right?
And as well as some actually were selected to be funded, or budgeted. So as you know, that this one was funded, this one was as well. Let me get to our first one that was not, Shoshone Detention Pond, so all these ponds here.
This is what we're talking about?
Yep.
So that's what we're talking
So that's that
And that's the
1.4?
1.4 million.
And there's, I can actually jump to all the
There are a
ponds.
couple
There's
other
more,
ponds.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let me jump to the ponds, so there's all your ponds.
And so those that were budgeted make more sense than any others, because that does free up that money.
But none of the ponds were
They're
budgeted,
eligible,
right?
So none of the
None of the
We didn't
ponds were
complete
budgeted.
None of these guys.
We tried.
But you could knock them off and then not, they would, because otherwise they're gonna sit there,
Yeah,
I like it.
again and again and again and again, right?
Anything
Now-
that qualifies, stick on.
Yeah, and then there's park strips.
Are those qualifying?
Park strips are not.
park strips
Okay,
are not.
so-
Okay, don't do that.
So
The
let's
only
go to
thing,
wires.
it's, again, those, it's. the
Water,
the main
stormwater.
Utilities, water, stormwater, we don't have to really worry about sewer other than if we're partnering and broadband. Those are the
ADA
ones that
ramps?
are
No.
allowed, otherwise, helping the fire district would be an eligible expense.
What about the public works yard fencing?
Yeah, probably not.
Kind of related, not just, we're getting out of that.
But you could use it to buy software, frankly, if you were trying to make everything online.
Right.
People were doing that.
Which everything else is
What about
transportation
the
funds, so.
cemetery
Yeah.
restrooms?
Which parks, what's that word?
And that's why if you did do the sewer project, then when that money
That was
comes
already
back, then
funded
you could
too.
maybe
I think
check
we already
some more.
Which
budgeted
one?
for that, didn't we?
Park restroom.
Cemetery restroom.
It was funded in the amendment.
Oh, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think as I'm just kind of scrolling through these, the ones that I'm just seeing that are eligible are your ponds, like as we've been discussing.
No parks, rockways, or decks, or
Let's just do that. Let's do those then. That's good. And then if we can only relate it to ponds, can we expedite your number 2 on your whiteboard list? Get those thrown in here too.
what's that budget, you think? Or cost estimate? No, is that,
No,
then this is,
The ones on your.
Oh, the other ponds, I thought, were they not included in this? I don't,
No.
it's hard to tell because of the size and some of them, there are developers like the Belvan project, the developers. Is pay to fee lieu or.
Yeah, these are the ones that the city's holding the bags. There's others that the developer's holding the bag that we haven't quantified on this.
okay.
So we'll have to go back and look at that one, I don't know the number right off the top of my head.
But those are all the ones that you want to be the first priority,
Love to
right?
get rid of that back.
Are these first priority
UFA
then?
and all of these ponds.
UFA first, cause it's a,
UFA.
Yeah, it's
UFA,
105,
right.
so that one's easy.
I would say absolutely these. I don't think there's any argument. Let's get, I mean, that takes 6 unsightly, problematic things that have been around for a long
That he
time, get them
complained
all
about,
done.
too.
Yeah, boom.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, remind me, I believe these are all already designed by GDOT.
They're designed, there's still a component of the irrigation design that needs to be done, so there's a little bit needs to be done. Now, one item I will mention is that Range East is currently under design by a developer that may do that right now.
Cause they
Or
took
this
it
year.
back, huh?
Yeah, but we
Yeah.
would only have to pay that developer, I believe it was 30-something thousand for the fee
40,000
in lieu
there.
that was originally paid.
Yeah, yeah,
So
40,
you would knock
40.
off 220,000
yeah, okay.
yeah.
if that gets done. I don't know if that'll come to fruition, but that's,
Because we just get complaints, another thing too is this is a cost to us constantly to go out there and do weeds and deal with the complaint.
And we told them we thought there was about a $2.3 million pond in the auto mall area that we might have to do.
That's.
So
That's on the
it's
list.
on the
That's on the
list
list.
already, so I'm just thinking, because we have to tell them, here are the things we think we're gonna do it on. So I think saying you're doing storm drain retention makes sense.
But
And
then
I
would
don't know if
that
that's
be
a pond
included
you
in
wanna
that?
think about as well, but.
The detention pond has to be moved.
Needs to be moved and there are some flows that come from the town center over to there when we redo the plumbing on all that, so. There's some city component and there's developers component on that one.
that pond has largely a city deficiency that it solves for that particular one, but it's not a new pond. It's not an existing pond, it's a future pond.
I personally probably wait to start improvements on that till we get the master development agreement figured out and go through that process.
Agreed.
So then your next would be the innovation district or money towards Old Town, with whatever's left after all of these.
Innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably close to 2 on the on the ponds, 2.5, 2.8 on the innovation district really.
And
So
then,
it's probably all that money.
But we should probably have
A couple other small
another couple
projects.
things on there just to make sure.
And or a contingency plan, cause I'm super not comfortable moving forward on the sewer line project if we don't know for confident
Right.
that they're gonna reimburse us on that.
So we need
A letter of intent or
a
something
couple other
draft.
things on there just in
You can get it
case, right?
Yeah.
So,
Talk with them.
okay, I would
Or would you
ask
need
if there are
reimbursement
any
agreement?
other ponds. If there are any other ponds that we need to get done, let's get them done.
Well, the nice thing is that we have change of policy, so we don't have these
Just
problems.
make sure you get council Anderson's pond on there too.
So I can talk to the sewer district and see if we can have it on for like discussion in their board meeting. I think it's on the it's coming up in a couple weeks, I believe, and there should be a council representative, I would imagine. So that
How soon can these other ponds, the ones you're talking about in interconnection with the other agreements or the other builders?
we'd have to talk to them. We have to make sure with Edge Homes that the outfall is installed and ready to receive water. And then if it is all the way in, then you can start.
Then you can get a budget
We'd have
cost
to
and
make sure
put that
that
on.
they are that all the projects will be completed and will be paid up by the time that we have to have all of our funds expended,
What time
which is
frame
in
is that?
2024.
Sorry, will you
yeah.
remind me again exactly what date we have to, do we meet again before we have to have this
Yes, we do.
finalized? We do.
The
You have one more
26th.
meeting.
Then,
We meet
then,
the 26th, and then
so that give you enough time to really finalize.
So the
stuff?
sewer
I
district,
think Alan will probably have it all ready to go so that he can just hit send if we end up being good with this,
Yeah.
and then that way we can just make edits.
Cause I see city engineers meeting that week, so we'll be out of town.
So you're talking about for these other two ponds, maybe we should talk internally as staff and see if we can get something together, at least in the ballpark.
So add it to the list.
How much detail do they need?
I think they need the total cost, exactly what the project is, and when the funds will be expended by.
Again, if you're putting, here's all these projects and here's their estimates, and we're gonna build as many of them as we can.
We
They're
fall short.
estimates,
Yeah.
right? You're gonna do bids and
Oh,
I think they'll probably be all right. They just wanna make sure you're spending on eligible items and that you're actually going to
have a
spend
plan.
on it.
but here's the other thing. Never mind.
We will actually have amendment times all the way till it's finished in July of 2024.
I think you can find, even if you give them a very early estimate, and then we can refine it.
Like, we'll do the sewer line district by 2024, 2025, right? Yeah.
So Alan, I mean, so we could amend this if, for some reason the sewer district doesn't go through, we can come back and amend this, so we don't.
But we wanna make sure there's a project eligible to take those funds up.
But I think we will, I'm saying, I
Yeah.
think we've got time now, I don't think we need to sit here and find $6 million worth of projects right now.
Correct.
We find enough for
Just
4.8.
enough for us to put on our list
Yep.
that's due January 31st.
Nice, okay.
Sure, we
think
can
that's
find
good.
other storm drain needs to
Yeah.
automatically be eligible.
And I would say that storm drain issues that are, something that we're committed to or responsible for.
Yeah.
Let's get those on the list because there's a lot of things that snuck up on us, right? Some things we've had to do some amendments because we have to pay for this or build this infrastructure or do that kind of thing, right? I keep wondering if some of that stuff that we have to do for Hidden Oaks could be a part of this too.
Hidden Oaks had Jonathan and I were just speaking
That
online.
would help close that budget gap just a little bit,
Not
right?
Hidden Oaks, but the other Ivory development.
The biggest share of Hidden Oaks is roads.
Juniper Estates. When
Juniper
they
Estates.
built L&L Hamilton Park, there needs to be some storm drain improvements in there to run the water into L&L Hamilton instead of into the ponds inside of Hamilton Farms. So that'd be another eligible project, that's one that we will have a hard time getting to.
12 acre feet, just kind of waiting for some plumbing like Dick said for it to happen, so.
Just don't plug it.
Yeah, let's put that on
Look
the
at it,
list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we should look at the Hidden Oaks.
The Hidden Oaks.
Yeah,
If there's any
because
part of
we're already
that too,
having-
because
we're
we already know
for
we
it.
gotta pay for that,
Yep.
kinda surprisingly, let's see if we can get that number down.
Yeah, anything we can put towards that.
So
Yeah,
Blake, will you
storm drain
schedule a
stuff.
meeting for
Yeah.
us to sit down and kind of go through all of those and go through the funds? That way it's for when it's convenient for you guys.
Essentially,
We'll
they
have
wanted
to-
it to be things that would make a big difference, but if we have all these ponds that are gonna sit here
Micro
for the
projects,
Good
next
luck,
30
I'm in
years, we can't
interviews
get
all
to
day
them.
tomorrow.
I think that actually makes a difference.
I would agree.
Okay, you have
Okay.
good
Thank you.
direction from us
Yep,
then?
that's great,
Thanks,
thank you.
Thank you so much, Cameron. We've got item 2.4, discussion regarding the proposed amendment to Title 10, pertaining to accessory structure regulations. Mr. Spencer.
Do we have a clicker?
Or Clint.
All right, I know there's nothing more exciting than accessory structures. So, and the planning commission and the mayor's been dealing with this for a good some time now. This kind of started back in February of 2019. So you can see it's been stuck in planning commission for a long time, trying to get consensus on how to move forward. We feel like we've got that now. And when I was putting this PowerPoint together, Jonathan came to me and said, "Hey, you got too many slides, so if this is death by PowerPoint, I apologize." But there's basically two main objectives that we wanted to accomplish with this amendment. One of them is that right now, when we look at an accessory structure, the ordinance, you have to look at too many different places and it gets confusing and cumbersome. So we want to consolidate everything into one location, one ordinance that we can look at and just, easily review it. And the other one is that, as many of you know, a lot of parts of our ordinance were adopted from other places and were possibly outdated. And so we wanted to kind of get an update. What is Harriman, what are our values now, going into the future, and hopefully this ordinance can reflect that. So, a brief summary of what we looked at in the updates is, first is add clarifying language to the purpose of the ordinance. Trying to integrate a little more objective versus subjective standards. We looked at architectural materials, street facing sides, what kind of materials a roof can look at or can be, and then excluding certain types of materials for finishing and stuff like that. We'll get into all of these a lot more in depth. We also looked at updates in terms of size, height, and setbacks. And then we've also included a special exception for certain conditions in the city, without opening it up for everybody to come in and say, hey, I want a variance or I want a special exception for my property, limiting that to a certain number of properties and situations that would warrant that. So the first part is just updating the purpose. And one of the things in terms, in regards of, in addition to establishing a uniform regulation is compatible with the character of the neighborhood, the planning commission thought that there should be a little more flexibility for the use of property for folks in Harriman, which we tried to integrate, giving a little more flexibility and providing a little more standards for how that flexibility is accomplished. So the areas that the ordinance regulates is location, height, architectural standards. We've updated our development standards table, which is was in your packet, and then again going over those special exceptions. We've also included as part of this a couple of definition for what is constituted as an irregular lot versus a regular lot, and that kind of leads to what is considered for a special exception. So in our staff proposal, I just wanted to make a couple of differentiations. There were some changes from staff proposal to planning commission. And these are the three here. The first one, just in terms of what property is included in terms of calculation to how large the accessory building can be. The second one is in terms of setback adjacent to a street. Can it be closer or should it be far away? And then the last one is just in classification of a cul-de-sac type lot. Should that be considered irregular or not? So the first part to go over here is the location and setbacks. I'm going to go through these a little bit in detail. If you start to fall asleep or glaze over, I'll try to go faster. But I just feel like the more information you have, I want to give a clear understanding so you know exactly. Because as much as we try to think, maybe this detail is too much, I feel like in the ordinances I've seen, the more detail, the better. Just gives clear understanding of what is expected, what can be built, what can be done. And we want to make sure that it matches the values of Harriman today. For example, I was driving home the other day, and even my wife, she was the first one to see it. She's like, what is that? And it was this accessory apartment being built in somebody's backyard. The lot can't be more than 7,000 square feet. And it's right next to the golf course, and there's this 2-story, to me, it's a monstrosity, but those are my values in my city. So we just want to make sure that these regulations that match the values of Harriman City. So the first one, so in terms of setback and distance from other buildings, for a building that's smaller than 200 square feet, so we're talking about the small Costco sheds and stuff like that, it can be right up next to the home or right up next to an adjacent accessory building on the property. For a small building, in terms of height, it is limited to 16 feet. And these are the setbacks, so 1 foot from the rear and side property line, 0 feet from any structure, 2 feet from an accessory structure. On an adjacent lot, so if there's your neighbor's lot, you have to be 2 feet away from at least your neighbor's accessory building, if it's the same size or larger. And then 5 feet behind the front setback of the home. And if it's on an interior side, so if you've got a large side yard, a lot of lots in the city I don't think meet this, but if somebody has extra side yard to locate an accessory structure in, they could do that, but they would have to meet that side yard requirement for the home and not have an additional exemption for an accessory structure. And then side yard adjacent to a street, And this is one of the changes that the planning commission made, it was that could be that could be as close as 1 foot. And then we're talking about medium and larger. So medium is 200 to 400 square feet. Larger is, of course, larger than that. If it's less than 16 feet, these are your setbacks, 3 feet from property line. That's both rear and side, 6 feet from accessory structures. So less than 200 square feet on the same lot, and if it's smaller, again, those 200 square foot structures can be right next to them. 6 feet from an accessory structure on an adjacent lot, 5 feet behind the front yard, similar to the smaller ones. Same, and then the side yard is, same as the primary structure. And then the difference from this one to the last one we saw is that instead of being 1 foot from the street, these are required to be 3 feet from the street. A little bit larger, a little bit taller. So in terms of what was approved by the planning commission, so we just wanted to make sure that we are all clear on what those changes kind of mean. In a standard subdivision or in any neighborhood, you have an established block face. And this yellow line kind of represents that, it's the area that there's not a permanent building. Somebody might park their car out there, somebody might park a tall van that obstructs views, but by and large, these are areas that are kind of open and, and should maintain open to give that kind of, that space in a neighborhood. Does this have a pointer on it? Oh, good.
See just to the left, see that trailer park there
Where at? This one?
in the middle? Yeah, that one.
Uh-huh.
How tall do you think that trailer is?
That trailer, I don't know.
It's probably an 8-foot trailer.
Probably.
We see that some people park their big fifth wheels and they're pretty tall, taller than most people's shed that
Right.
could be parked right there, and that would be,
And I don't think it's permitted to park those in your front yard. So,
we can't, so they couldn't park their trailer there.
it should not be.
Is it temporary parking?
You're not
But
supposed to live
they're-
in it.
I'm not supposed to live in it,
It's
right?
not,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's not livable,
I
but
see that every day too.
yeah.
Yeah, I see people's
On the
motorhomes
street.
parked like that.
So that kind of gets into the more enforcement stuff, but yeah. And one of the images that I have kind of, you can see how that relates a little bit. So this is, in terms of setback, what staff's proposal was for these structures to take place behind, this is, for example, this corner lot here, a side yard setback adjacent to a street. So this is the side, this is the front here. This side yard, we were recommending to have the building placed behind the setback of the home, which keeps it in line with this block face that's been established with the front yard setbacks here. One of the changes the planning commission wanted to make was to push these out so they could be closer to the street, as close as 3 feet for a larger structure and as close as 1 foot for a smaller structure. And that's fine and dandy, we just want to make sure that these are really what the community's values are. Again, this is another example. This is where staff's recommendation would be for an accessory structure, and this is where, with the potential changes, that's where that could be located.
Clint, I just wanna point out, the staff recommendation is consistent with the current code, how that current code would apply to that situation.
So for the next couple of slides, I'm gonna show, I did some, it's really rough graphics, but, thank goodness for what is it, ARC, or no, not ARC, it's the globe. Google Earth. There we go, thank you. Everybody knows what it is, just me. But Google Earth, I can take some models and drop them in, and the images are a little rough, but anyways, the images we're looking at involve this lot here, and then a lot of the views are taken from this driveway, so to speak. So this is what currently exists now. So you can see the fence, and this is the RV that's parked there. That's a 6-foot fence, that might be an 8-foot trailer or something like that. So looking this way, you can see, the front yards are largely unobstructed by views. This is, I think, a 16-foot tall shed here. So you can see how that, begins to obstruct, and if you're a pedestrian walking here, if that's 1 foot off the property line, how that might feel. And then this is a little bit larger structure, which was another one of the recommendations from the commission, that could go up to as large as just 37 by 40 by 16. And, how that changes kind of the block face from here to this image here. And this is just another closer view, so, say that resident John here steps out onto his sidewalk, this is what he looks at every day as he walks out to his driveway.
So currently that's permitted.
No.
No, okay.
That's what, these are the changes that the planning commission had made to the staff recommendation. So this is, again, this is the staff recommendation in terms of size and location. With the changes that the commission made, they wanted to include not just the rear yard for calculation, but the rear and the side yards. So that structure could become a lot larger, as you can see here.
But it can't crash into the house.
It can't crash into the house.
That's a little skewed.
That's my graphic challenge.
There's a 1 foot.
Google Earth is very interesting.
Just have a notch out of the side of the building.
Right.
There's a few feet
It's a breezeway.
because of the size.
This is another example of a corner lot with it's got a park behind it. This is the current view, kind of unobstructed. This is with a 16-foot tall structure, I think that's less than 200 square feet. And this is what the ordinance would allow in terms of height and size and location. That's, approximately set back 3 feet from that fence line. You can see the height and how that appears as you look towards the park from the corner.
Can they do a curb cut and access it from there? So that would allow them access into a garage on
and
their
you'll have
back.
to forgive, this is an open.
I'm just saying, that would allow them, like if they have 18 teenagers there, they could park in that garage back there off a curb cut and things like that too, right?
They have 18 teenagers, that's 18. They could,
Sometimes it just feels like that when you have everyone driving.
yeah, I think by ordinance, I think they could do
too
another
many.
driveway here.
15 too many.
Then again, just in terms of size, what that kind of looks and feels like. So in terms of height, for small buildings, anything less than 200 square feet is limited to 16 feet tall as a maximum. For medium buildings, so these are the 200 to 400, on lots less than 10,000 square feet is 16 feet max. And then lots larger than 10,000 square feet can go up to 25 feet, but for every 1 foot of height above that 16 foot, you have an additional foot of setback. So the initial setback would be 3 feet, and then for every foot above. Like we looked at one with Councilman Shields this week, and he wanted to do a 22-foot tall structure. So with his setbacks, he would have 3 feet plus that an additional, 6 feet.
6 feet.
So he'd have a 9-foot setback.
So you have to push it 9 feet off of that side.
Right. Side and rear.
Oh, wow.
So then it gets to be, but my question is too, is once you get, like I saw your pictures before and it's like, oh, that looks terrible, but when you start looking at some of the, first of all, the lot sizes in our city and how it would apply, and can you really get that big of a building? You know what I mean? It just becomes less and less likely that you could build a lot of this stuff anyway.
Right, so the ones that I showed you earlier, these are based off of, this is the size that calculated, once you add in the side yards and the rear yard, this is the size of structure, that's
that would be allowed.
represented.
It could be
Okay,
allowed.
1 foot setbacks on that?
So these would be
3
3 foot setbacks in the rear and then 3 foot setbacks on the back.
And how far from
That's
the
what
structure?
was, so, I'm sorry?
And how far from the existing structure?
I don't know.
It could be a 0 or 1 foot, I believe. is
Yeah,
fine.
that looks pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, I probably could have dropped in a little bit better, but
So with these corner lots, in previous conversations we've had about this over way too long a period. At least for me, the big issue with the corner lots wasn't so much this shape, right? It's those that the majority of the usable space is the side yard in relation to which direction the house is facing. Right, so if you calculate the backyard, like they can put nothing there. And I think that's the intention of changing this to include the side yards for those sorts of instances, not necessarily these, which is why it makes it difficult to write something that fits everything, because you can't.
Yeah.
right, and that might fit in the special exception. I'll have to get into that a little bit more.
Why did the planning commission decide that they wanted to change this over what the initial staff recommendation was? What was their reasoning for this?
Well, a lot of it is what Councilman Henderson had talked about, just allowing a little more flexibility for corner lots specifically.
Cul-de-sacs, I think there's
Because it
some of
feels
those
like
issues with those in the bottom of
Because
Cause it feels like they're being penalized for living on the corner, everybody else could do it, but you can't cause you live on a corner.
Well, and you're, like I said, in those instances where just the direction that the house faces, you're calculating the square
You
footage of the
change the side
backyard
to back to
Yeah.
figure
here
out which
instead
way
of the
the
usable
house
space
Yeah.
you have here.
For sure.
Typically, as you know, a corner lot has a larger side yard, and so a lot of builders, in order to have a kind of a typical building area, building envelope, they'll make those corner lots a little bit bigger because of that. Certainly, the commission's proposal to you is something that the council can act on. We're just trying to let you know that we would be really unique as a city in allowing a provision like this, and if it's consistent with our values, then great. But it is quite a unique solution.
Well, I guess that's where I'm stuck
Yeah.
on, reading through the report. I don't know if, I don't wanna put Lauren on the spot, but I'm curious what the planning commission's reasoning is for that, because then you're also wanting to have a special an exception process, which for this, I hate exceptions, cause everybody thinks they have an exception. But I don't see any way around it for something like this, cause there's some of those that are just an odd shape. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can't write something that fits everything.
Right, right, and that was one of the reasons why we struggled for so
So
long.
if we're gonna have that exception, then why add this stuff back into it? Because to me, that sort of thing's trying to address the exception.
So, but is this part of the exceptions? I mean, does it fit any of the exception criteria?
I don't know that it does right now, but that's something that we could modify for, we could look at that and come up with some language to
It's what if
fit
it's
corner
an odd
lots.
shape or there's
Or
several
corner
things
lot,
that the corner lot fits.
massive side yard.
And I definitely think that's what drove the discussion was fewer exception, fewer.
Well, and sitting here, I'd rather have fewer exceptions, but I mean, the problems that they're pointing out, and as you read through the report, I mean, yeah, those are
That
definite
visual was
problems that
stunning to
happen.
me, that visual was
Yeah.
pretty.
Yeah, cause if I'm the guy that lives next door, I'm like, wait a second,
Those sidelines are very critical when you're the neighbor.
And I think when they were talking a lot of it was just that small Costco type shed, but when you look at what both, and I don't know if we really talked much together, when you put those together, the side yard and the size of that, I mean, that was daunting, I think, and I don't know if that was ever necessarily, when I was there, I don't know if that was visualized necessarily, it was.
For that corner lot, it was about a 10,000 square foot lot. It adding in the side yards, in the calculation, it added 600 square feet to what that could be. So it does add and it's pretty substantial.
So one question on height, because that's been brought up on another property. Where is that measured from and how is that measured?
On grade, for example.
So it's
From grade to peak.
On the equal level, if it's a sloping grade,
So if
it's,
it's a sloping grade, we take a point, I don't have a
grease pen.
Raw vertical distance above the lowest approved finished grade at any point on the perimeter of a building to the highest point of the coping of a flat roof, or to the highest point of the ridge line of a pitched, hipped, or mansard roof.
So this is the height here. So this is the roof here.
Okay.
So we take this is the highest point and the lowest point,
Are you averaging?
and then we take a midpoint here. And so we measure it from here to the roof of the building. It's hard to explain that verbally, so.
No, as long as it's consistent.
Yeah, I had heartache with chapter 3 definitions on some of that too. It's just only from my own experience at my home. Chapter 3 definitions, 3B, it talks about finished grade shall be the ground elevation determined during the final grading of the subdivision or natural unmodified grade. Well, they modified the grade 14 feet behind my house, so, and then they could have went 35 feet above that, but at the time they couldn't do that because it was off the natural grade. So are we changing that to what the subdivision is? Are we going above the subdivision grade? Because I'm not comfortable with that if that's the case.
I think that's one of the things that we're looking at. There's a lot in our ordinance that needs to be revised and updated and changed. We recognize that, and one of those, we had an intern for the past 6 months, and he did some research to kind of help identify what other cities were doing and how they're approaching that, and that's something that we're working towards in terms of clarifying, that grade
That's a lot
condition.
line, yeah.
Yeah, cause I have a hard time with that.
It needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Are we consistent with other cities? I know you like you have examples of Sandy and a couple other, are we in line with a lot of those?
With how they measure height or?
Well, in general, with on the auxiliary structures.
I think, I think a lot of cities hit on the same, I don't know that anybody is consistent, like if there's like a real standard, in terms of height and setback and all that kind of stuff. I think every city's kind of unique in its own. But we hit on certain spots in different cities.
Averaging, of course, is common when you're dealing with the grade.
Yeah.
The county did measurements to the midpoint of the roof for, they may even still. So a lot of cities who developed under the county initially adopted the midpoint measurement, and we did as well. When the city adopted the zoning amendment at the end of 2017, we went to measuring to the ridge, which is becoming a little more common because it's easier to administrate.
Yeah.
But the end result of that is it does tend to hold down the height of the structures overall. So by measuring to the ridge, it results in some shorter structures in the community.
But it's easier, I think, for just a layman to be able to look and say, when you talk about 35 feet, you're thinking you mean to the top of
Or the floor of
somebody's
the
roof.
beach, yeah.
And so then as a resident, you come in, you're like, wait, that's over that. Well, it's only to the midline, you know what I mean? It just
Right,
becomes
right.
very confusing.
It's clearer to do to the ridge, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
You know, so in our conversation that we had, this question of where did the 16 feet come from? Why is that the magic number? Why isn't it 18? Why isn't it 14? Right? Like, it's just
Yeah.
this magic 16 feet, and then that is the delineating point to create these additional setbacks and stuff. I just don't know that always makes sense, right? I mean, I know if you have a 30-foot tall building,
Adjacent.
right, you have to go 10 feet. If you have a 25-foot tall building, it's 9 feet. You know what I mean? That it doesn't seem like it's an appropriate, equally applied thing. It's a little more punitive for the 25-foot tall thing, right?
Right.
The other thing is that there's no language that compares the size of the building to the size of the house. I know there were some other city ordinances that said it can't be within the height or 2 feet less than the existing structures on the property or something like that.
So in the land table, it does talk about that. So in terms of maximum size, it can be, a combination of rear and side yards or 75% of the footprint of the home, whichever is less.
Right, in
It's a
square footage, but not in
Oh,
height.
not in height.
Right, that's what I'm talking about, is the height of a building.
Right, it does not.
So, if you've got a really, like we were talking about this particular lot, the resident up in my district up there who's got a pretty high pitched roof and fairly tall structure. He wanted to do 21 or 22 feet. I still think that's 4, 5, or 6 feet below the top of his house,
If not more.
if not more. And that doesn't seem like that's an architectural anomaly or an exception to what's going on in the neighborhood or something.
Devil's advocate, if my neighbor builds a big garage right next to my fence, and I've spent a whole bunch of money putting in a nice garden, irrigated, etc., and he puts that thing in so that the sun never hits my garden, right? Then I have a problem. So the height matters on that auxiliary building, right? I bought that place, that's where the house is, the structure is. Yeah, they might have a shed or something, but there would be a setback that would account for that sort of thing. So again, to make a rule one size fits all, if you're just lining up a subdivision on equal ground, it's a little easier than if you're looking at elevation. So in your neighborhood where there's maybe that elevation and there isn't that sight line issue, that might not be an issue for that yard. But if they're next to each other and you've got a 20-foot building next to the fence, that can be a big problem.
Right, the other thing it doesn't take into consideration is the grade of houses, right? I mean, so I live right near Emmeline, right? So the houses on Emmeline is here, the backyard of the house on the next street up is here, right? So this person building a 16 or 18 foot tall thing is no problem. That person builds a 20 foot tall structure, it's gonna just tower over the existing house, right? So how do we accommodate for that, right? There's so many of these things that it's like if you could understand all of the variables, we could probably come up with some reasonable ideas. There's just so many variables, how do you quantify that? You know, in this one particular instance, where they're backed up, they're in a cul-de-sac backed up to the foothill, right? There's nothing gonna be behind them, nothing ever gonna be there. Putting the structure back there isn't an issue, right? But that's not the same thing as somebody who's on a big hill where their backyard's over somebody else's yard, or it's not the same thing as an agricultural lot next to each other. It's not the same thing as,
Which is why
you
I'm
know.
more okay with having an exception clause for these sorts of structures, because it does depend on that situation. And the adjacent property owners get noticed, right? They're gonna get it in the mail if they have a problem, then you go through this process, right? I mean, that's kind of the way that it should be, really, right?
What problem are we trying to solve with this ordinance?
That's what I kept asking,
Just
as I
making it-
was reading through it,
Yeah.
why are we, what's the
This
problem we're
is-
trying to solve by changing?
We were notified about two issues that were going on with two different accessory
Yeah, and those-
structures. Is this to try and is this to try and fix that, or is this to try and fix what's already happened?
Well, this is basically just trying to update
The ordinance.
the ordinance to match what our standards are. Like I said, the standards that we have now, I think were adopted from another city. Where the 16 feet came from, I don't know. It's different, and like I said, it's just different in every city. So we want to get the Harriman approach on how, you know, what's the base height? What should these buildings be? What should the setbacks be? You know.
Do we
those
make a
kinds of-
one size fits all for small buildings?
So as I read through it, it sounded like that's what staff had set out to do, is just kind of clean it up, right? So it was easier to understand and using those same, you know, standards, right, across the board, which is fine, but then it's these three things that the planning commission wanted to change to what you're recommending, right? That's the issue that we're talking about here.
A little bit.
Yeah. Yes?
I don't-
Yeah,
To me,
I
to me,
think
yeah,
that's what's
let's,
changed.
yeah, let's clean it up with the standards as far as the three
It
extra
can
things.
be any size from 8
I
to
think
12
that's the
feet.
question you're asking.
8 to 12,
And
not
roughly-
16.
You can get a 116, but you're usually over 200 square feet, and a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, most storage sheds are half tall, 12 feet.
Yeah, 12 feet to the peak roughly, yeah.
That's why I'm curious
That's
about
what I mean,
where
if it's-
16 feet ever
Yeah,
came from.
exactly.
If we're within that standard, great, but if that's what you're asking is considering these three things that the planning commission wanted to change to what staff was recommending to just clean up the code, then I'd have to say, at least my feedback, if you're ready for that, would be on number one, include rear and side yards. I'd say don't include that if it can be if those would qualify for the
Exception.
exception process. 2, for small accessory buildings less than 200 square feet, the side yard setback next to the public street can be 1 foot. That's the, what'd you call it, the block face?
Yeah.
That part. The planning commission didn't wanna have that block face, they wanted to allow it to go all the way out to the fence. I'm a little bit torn on that one, if it's within reason, I'm okay putting a small thing towards the fence, but that giant garage towards the fence. I understand where staff's coming from with the block base, so same thing to me, if these three things can fit into the exception thing, just put them in the exception thing, keep the code clean. These can be exceptions that can be dealt with on a case by case basis with all the varying factors.
Both rational people sit down and
Yeah,
have a
because
conversation.
no neighborhood is alike, right? And if I talk to my neighbor and he's got a super big problem with me putting something there, I'd wanna know that.
If you like.
Sometimes neighbors just won't agree, but that's why you have the process, right? To go through and state your case and have reasonable people that represent you. Go through.
But I think there's a big difference between a shed 200 square feet or less than an auxiliary building.
Right.
And that's
why I say you gotta have some standards to start with.
because then you have a whole permit process, a whole application process for those anyways.
Yeah, and whether or
If you
not
wanna
it's
go
just gonna be
beyond that basic standard, if it's then
Agreed.
for whatever reason, it's not fair because your lot's a different shape or the road's here instead of here, whatever that is, then that's what the exception process.
So then I have a couple more to add to that. 10-34-5C,
Agricultural structures may utilize such exterior building materials that are appropriate to use while still being the same color as the main dwelling. Gives me a little bit of heartache. What if you just wanna have a red barn or a brown barn?
Right.
To me, that goes with the size of lot again, a smaller neighborhood, like, just plotted neighborhood. At least, I'll use my neighborhood as an example. We have some that are a quarter acre or even a little bit less than others that are half acre, and you can, technically you should be able to have large animals, but there are tons of these auxiliary buildings in my neighborhood. I'm jealous of the guys that have them. I wish I could put one up. But I love that they require the face of it
We're residential.
to
Yeah,
match
me
the house, right?
Yeah.
They look fantastic, it flows in the neighborhood, they enhance everything, rather than the guy that's got a metal tin barn or a red barn back there. It doesn't fit in a residential
But,
setting if it's a larger agricultural.
Well, it's for agricultural structure.
Right, but
Then
here's the
I don't
difference,
think
right?
that fits.
This goes back to what you were talking about at the beginning.
Better ag.
If you're in an A25,
Right, but.
is that an agricultural shed or is that a residential
Well,
shed,
but
right?
I think it's clear that agriculture structures with animals, it clarifies
Sure, it's a different one.
agricultural
That's true.
It's a different structure.
Yeah, I think if you're truly using it for agriculture, then it, like, I tell you, my cousin lived in Riverton a while back and she erected an arena, right? And, it's a nice arena, it was the little hoopy, I don't know, the coverall kind,
Gonzalez.
yeah. But they made her all around the bottom go up 4 feet and
Brick or
brick and masonry around the outside of it, and I was like, this is crazy, it's clear back, no one ever sees it even from the road, what, you know what I mean? And I don't want to impose that kind of stuff, to me, it doesn't make any sense.
I agree.
with that.
There's the same stuff up on Kokomo and stuff as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yep.
I just don't wanna be so imposing that it's like, oh, you have to have, it has to be brick and stone on your,
Can we even mandate that now from the state ordinance though?
So the
Exterior finished.
state says
And
we
let-
can't regulate single family, but they didn't say anything about accessory structure.
and then I was curious on your definitions in 3, also it said, an accessory building or structure also includes a building clearly incidental to an agricultural or animal care land use located on a lot in an agricultural zone, which lot meets the minimum lot size for such zone and is not less than half acre in area. We have lots of agricultural lots that are less than half an acre in area. So I don't know, I'm confused about
And
that.
third acres or point, we
Quarter
had a lot
acre.
about 4 9s and 4 5s.
That's the size of the structure too, right?
It's just the
You're talking about
it was
something
just
that's
a
200 square
definition.
feet or larger, that this
That's in
stuff
current
would
code,
apply
right?
to.
That's just,
I'm just saying, if we're cleaning it up, if that's a definition, I don't understand why it says, I just want some clarity on that, why does it say?
Is that current ordinance, or is that?
It's not underlined, so assuming so, yeah. It just seems like it's not in harmony with what we have in our areas. Anyway,
We'll look
can you
at that,
check on
Sherry.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. So I know the time is short.
yeah, we need.
You're like, I'm not sure what direction it
Do
is.
This is
want
very
us-
similar to the planning commission, just so you know.
Sounds like we're gonna need another meeting and a work session.
I think so.
Sounds like we've got a few things that we can try and work on addressing the commission's 3 recommendations. So-
Knowing us is probably 2 more work meetings.
Okay.
Well, I made this challenge to the planning commission to drive around and look at some of these. I mean, I think it makes a world of a difference when you
Yeah.
drive around.
Get outside of your neighborhood
Yeah.
and look
Get
at
outside
it.
and look and
See
see.
sight
Just-
lines and
Just
see-
like your little presentation up there, drop the building in
Yeah.
off of Benogad and
It's so
see what
easy
it
to,
looks like.
in a picture, it looks one thing, when you go see it in person, it's just
Yeah.
a different, so.
For us, for the staff, Counselor Henderson made some suggestions, trying to maybe build those into the accept, is that the direction you want us to work on and bring back? to
I
show-
really like his idea of keeping the code clean and providing an exception process. If that's something that we could handle as an exception, handle it as an exception.
The one,
But the issue is that you end up with, everybody thinks they deserve an
Everybody's
exception,
special.
right?
And we'll need to have
Right.
standards, obviously.
Yep.
Right.
So there's part of that in there that we have language to qualify for an exception, it has to have
Right.
one of these things, so that it hopefully filters that down.
Or 2 of the
Right.
3 categories is
Yeah, I agree.
And I mean,
I like
in
that.
in cities that are developed, where they're not dealing with all the things that we're dealing with, it's just running the city, this is the sort of thing that you do. Right?
Yeah.
So is that easier, I'm just trying
I
to
give
give
out one
some
for
direction to
exception.
you all, and maybe we can talk about how to to structure that, but we'll focus on maybe how to deal with the exception pieces where the planning commission was going. It sounds really like cul-de-sacs and corner lots, and then keep the code clean. So, I mean, that's what we'll work on for the next meeting, is you'll see something that might fit that mold.
Yeah, and we'll probably need to skip the next meeting.
Yeah,
the one
it'll
after
be
that.
February
Yeah,
for that.
but we make that note too about the elevations, I wanna understand where you're calculating elevations, existing grade, natural grade, that kind of stuff, I think that needs to be clear.
You can do that. All right, thank you so much.
Good luck. Okay, with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn our work meeting to when?
Motion to temporarily adjourn our work meeting for purposes of going into general meeting.
Okay, motion by Steve, second by Jenny. All in favor?
Aye.
I can feel you.